The camera opens on a cabin deep in the misty woods. A man with battle-worn eyes and a loyal German shepherd stands guard as thunder rolls in the distance. Somewhere beyond the rain, a scream breaks the night. Behind the golden gates of a billionaire's mansion, evil hides beneath silk and wine. He thought his days as a soldier were over, but when his dog looked up and he saw the fear in that girl's eyes, something inside him awakened again. This isn't just a rescue. It's a war for truth, for freedom, and for every soul who ever thought they were powerless. If stories of courage, loyalty, and second chances touch your heart, subscribe now and join us for more true inspired tales that prove kindness is the strongest weapon of all. The evening heat of Charleston lingered like a ghost above the quiet suburbs, pressing down on the rooftops until the air itself seemed to hum. Ethan Cole sat on the back porch of his weathered house, a chipped mug of black coffee in one hand, and the distant sound of cicadas filling the silence he had come to depend on. He was 38, broad-shouldered but lean, his frame still holding the quiet precision of a man trained to move unseen. His hair was dark and trimmed short, peppered lightly with gray near the temples, and a faint scar curved under his jaw, a remnant of a mission that had gone wrong in Kandahar. His face was hard-edged, his gaze the color of steel that had seen too much fire. For all his strength, his movements carried the weariness of a soldier who had returned from too many battles with no real victory to bring home. At his feet lay Luna, his German shepherd, 5 years old, her coat a rich blend of sable and black, her amber eyes alert even in stillness. She was the last partner from his SEAL K-9 unit, a survivor like him. Luna had been trained to detect explosives, track enemies, and comfort dying men with the warmth of her breath. She carried a faint scar across her right flank, a pale thread in the fur where shrapnel had once grazed her. Ethan sometimes traced that scar absent-mindedly, as if it were proof that they were both still alive by accident. Since leaving the Navy, he had moved to this quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Charleston to escape noise, crowds, and the endless reminders of what duty had cost him. He fixed fences, helped at the animal shelter twice a week, and spoke to almost no one. The neighbors thought him polite but distant, that ex-military guy with the shepherd. That was all he wanted to be. Silence was a fragile peace, and he guarded it fiercely. The peace shattered just after midnight. Luna rose from her place on the porch, ears flicking toward the left fence, the one that bordered the grand estate next door. Her body went rigid, muscles tight beneath her coat. Then she barked, low, sharp once, then again louder. Ethan set the mug down and frowned. "Easy, girl," he muttered, but her hackles didn't lower. He heard it then, faint, strangled, a sound not made by the wind or any animal. A woman's voice, a cry. He stepped closer to the fence, a tall cedar barrier separating his worn property from the Hale estate. Everyone in Charleston knew the name Victoria Hale. She was one of those social powerhouses who donated to charity luncheons, attended galas draped in diamonds, and appeared in magazines under headlines about Southern grace. But those who lived nearby whispered other words: arrogant, controlling, cruel. Ethan had seen her once from afar, a tall woman in her early 50s, statuesque in a silk dress, her blonde hair pinned in an immaculate twist, her posture sharp enough to cut glass. Her wealth had not softened her eyes. They were the kind that measured people, not moments. Tonight, the manor beyond the fence was lit with too many lights for that late hour. the faint hum of a generator mixed with the far-off clink of glass. Then came another sound, a dull thud, followed by a short, muffled whimper. Luna growled. Ethan felt a cold ripple move through his chest. He stepped back into the house and grabbed his phone. The screen lit up the dark room. He hesitated, thumb hovering over 911. Logic said it wasn't his problem. He had seen worse. Families torn apart by war, innocents screaming in bombed-out streets. He had told himself that Charleston wasn't his battlefield. But when he pressed the call button, the line clicked, and a disinterested voice answered, the kind that had already decided not to help. 911, what's your emergency? He explained quickly. Possible domestic violence next door, a cry for help, sounds of distress. The operator paused. Sir, that's the Hale residence? Yes. A sigh. We'll make a note of it, but it's probably just a misunderstanding. Mrs. Hale's family has private security. They'll handle it. The line went dead. Ethan stared at the phone, the chill of memory crawling under his skin. That tone, the bureaucratic dismissal, sounded too much like the voices he'd heard during missions gone wrong. We can't intervene. Not our jurisdiction. He clenched his jaw until it hurt. Luna barked again, sharper this time. Ethan slipped outside with a small tactical flashlight and a quiet curse. The night air smelled of magnolia and damp soil. Through a narrow crack in the wooden slats, he saw movement in the Hale backyard. A young woman, maybe 22 or 23, kneeling on the flagstones near a small gazebo. Her blonde hair hung loose, catching the garden lights, but her face was pale and tight with fear. She wore a thin nightdress that clung to her frame. Her arms were wrapped around a trembling puppy, white fur, too small to be out in the night air. Behind her stood Victoria Hale, her poise now twisted into fury. She wore a silk robe of dark emerald, her makeup smeared from wine and anger. In her hand, she held something heavy. Ethan squinted and realized it was a crystal wine decanter. The older woman's voice carried, clipped and venomous. You ungrateful brat, I told you to get rid of that filthy mutt. The girl, Grace, Ethan remembered hearing the name once at a grocery store gossip line, shook her head frantically. Please, Mother, he's just a puppy. He didn't mean... The blow came suddenly. The decanter swung down, not at the girl, but at the puppy. The sound was small but unmistakable. Glass meeting flesh, a whimper cut short. Ethan's vision tunneled. His pulse roared in his ears. He had seen men die quietly. But there was something uniquely obscene about cruelty wrapped in privilege. He lifted his phone again, this time switching to video. He zoomed through the gap, capturing Victoria's hand raised again, the glint of blood on glass, Grace's desperate body shielding the animal. Luna pressed against his leg, whining low. Ethan crouched, whispering, "Not yet." His voice was tight. His training screamed at him to assess, to wait, to call for backup that would never come. Inside, Grace was crying softly, cradling the motionless pup. Victoria dropped the decanter, shards scattering like ice. "Clean that up, and if you ever embarrass me again," she snapped her fingers toward the house. "You'll find out what real pain feels like." Then she disappeared through the patio doors, leaving the girl alone. Ethan stopped recording. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from fury held on a leash. He backed away from the fence, pacing once before looking down at Luna. The dog stared up at him, ears forward, eyes burning with the same emotion that churned inside him. "I know," he whispered. "I know." He sat on the porch step, elbows on his knees. His thoughts drifted back to Kandahar, to a child he couldn't save, to the orders that had come too late. "Not your mission, Cole." Those words had haunted him for years. Tonight they echoed again, but weaker. He looked toward the Hale mansion, its manicured hedges and perfect symmetry hiding something rotten. He pulled up the video again, replayed the scene. The proof was there, undeniable, but proof meant nothing if the world refused to look. He scrolled to the contact list, thumb hovering over Marlene Price, the vet he volunteered with, a woman in her 50s with steady gray eyes and a quiet toughness. She had once told him, "Sometimes, Ethan, the only difference between mercy and duty is whether you decide to act." He didn't call her. Not yet. He knew what she'd say. He stared at the darkness, feeling the storm inside him grow heavier with each second. When another muffled cry echoed faintly through the rain gutters, Luna stood and placed her paw on his knee. Ethan met her gaze. She didn't blink. Her eyes were the same as they had been in the desert, steady, unyielding, waiting for his command. Lightning flickered somewhere far off, throwing the silhouettes of the two houses into brief, ghostly clarity, one small and humble, the other vast and golden, a temple built on cruelty. Ethan exhaled slowly. The night pressed close, heavy and electric. "All right," he murmured, "we'll do this my way." He reached for his camera again, adjusted the lens, and began to record the Hale estate in silence. Every light, every shadow, every detail that would prove what no one wanted to see. For now, he would wait. But deep inside, something in him had already crossed the line. And Luna, ever faithful, sat beside him, her amber eyes fixed on the house that had broken the night's peace. The next morning broke under a sky the color of old brass, heavy and waiting for rain. Charleston's heat clung to the air even at dawn, as though the earth itself was sweating beneath the weight of secrets. Ethan Cole stood at his kitchen window, a mug of black coffee forgotten in his hand, his eyes fixed on the Hale estate. The mansion's wide lawns were alive with motion. Gardeners in white uniforms trimming hedges, caterers rolling silver carts toward the patio, and a team of decorators arranging silk banners along the marble columns. Whatever had happened the night before had left no trace. The Hales were preparing for spectacle. Grace Hale was visible near the gazebo, her blonde hair tied neatly into a bun that couldn't hide the faint swelling along her cheekbone. Even from this distance, Ethan could tell she moved stiffly, like someone used to calculating pain in every breath. She wore a pale summer dress with sleeves that reached her wrists despite the heat, the kind of modesty that wasn't chosen but imposed. Behind her, Victoria Hale supervised with a glass of champagne already in hand, her green silk blouse glowing in the morning light. She smiled at the workers, but it wasn't warmth. It was control. Each gesture precise, every word a command disguised as civility. Ethan turned away from the window, jaw tight. He hadn't slept. His mind had replayed the sounds from last night, the thud of glass, the cry, the helpless whimper of the puppy. He had sent the video to a secure drive, labeling it Evidence A. Years of military discipline had taught him to document everything. But this wasn't a mission. It was something far murkier, a moral trap. Luna padded into the room, her claws clicking softly on the wooden floor. She nudged his leg and looked toward the back door, tail low but wagging once, cautious. "Yeah," Ethan murmured. "We'll take a look." They crossed the yard to the narrow alley between the fences. The morning smelled of wet grass and expensive perfume wafting from the Hale gardens. Through a slat, Ethan saw the first guests arrive. Sleek cars, valet attendants, the kind of people who laugh too loud and too easily. He recognized one man immediately. Harold Beckett, the city's deputy mayor. Beckett was in his mid-40s, heavyset but well-groomed, his thinning hair slicked back with too much gel. His face carried the smug confidence of a man who'd never heard the word no. Ethan remembered reading about him. Beckett had quietly buried several misconduct cases linked to the Hale Foundation, the kind of man who thrived under shadows. As the hours passed, the party swelled. String music floated over the walls, punctuated by the clink of crystal and the false brightness of laughter. Ethan recorded short clips through his camera lens, Grace carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres, limping slightly, Victoria smiling for photos with Beckett, her hand resting lightly on his arm, and, near the kitchen entrance, a nervous young maid stumbling as she poured wine. The maid, her name was Clara, judging by the scolding shout that followed, was small and wiry, no older than 20. Her dark curls were tucked beneath a too large cap, and her hands shook as she tried to steady the bottle. When a splash of red wine dotted Victoria's silk sleeve, the entire terrace fell silent. Victoria turned slowly, her lips curving into a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You've just ruined a $2,000 blouse, darling," she said sweetly, and then, with a motion too fast for civility, she struck Clara across the face. The slap echoed, sharp as a gunshot. The guests gasped. Beckett chuckled awkwardly, murmuring something about discipline. Grace froze, her eyes fixed on the trembling maid now kneeling to collect shards of glass. Ethan captured the scene, every movement, every face. Proof, again, but proof, he knew, was powerless without will. He lowered the camera and exhaled slowly. "That's enough," he muttered under his breath, though he wasn't sure if he meant it as a command to himself or the universe. The sky darkened by mid-afternoon, heavy with thunder. Guests began to retreat indoors, and by dusk the storm broke. Rain hammered the roofs, drumming against windows like impatient fists. Ethan sat on his porch again, Luna pressed against his knee. Every flash of lightning threw the mansion's silhouette into sharp relief, tall, proud, and hollow. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was building behind those walls. When the first scream came, it was nearly drowned by thunder. Luna's head shot up. Ethan grabbed his phone, switching on the camera as he moved to the fence. Through the narrow gap, he saw the patio lights flickering in the storm. Grace was there again, crouched over the small puppy from the night before, its body trembling, wrapped in a towel. Victoria stood a few feet away, drunk now, her robe soaked and clinging to her frame, her hair undone and wild. Her face was red, lips twisting in fury as she shouted words Ethan couldn't make out over the storm. Then she hurled the nearest object, a heavy wine bottle. It struck the puppy squarely before shattering against the stone. The sound was a sickening crack, followed by silence. Grace screamed and fell forward, clutching the animal. Ethan felt something inside him break. His rational mind, the one that had kept him alive through firefights and ambushes, started reciting rules. Observe, don't intervene, record and report. But the rest of him, the part that still dreamed of sand and blood and broken promises, roared louder. He dialed 911 again. The line clicked. 911. State your... This is a domestic assault in progress at the Hale residence, Ethan said sharply. You have to send a unit right now. Someone's hurt. The voice hesitated. Sir, "Are you the same caller from last night? We've been informed by Mrs. Hale's legal team that—" "Forget her lawyers," Ethan snapped. "There's a child and an animal bleeding in there. If you don't come, I'll handle it myself." The line went dead. He stared at the phone, rain dripping from his chin. Luna growled softly, reading the shift in his posture. She had seen that look before, the moment between patience and violence. Inside the estate, Grace was trying to lift the puppy, sobbing, while Victoria turned away, muttering curses. Ethan hit record once more, catching every frame through the narrow crack. The evidence would speak, but first, someone had to survive to tell it. He pocketed the phone and glanced at Luna. "Not yet," he said quietly, though his hands were already trembling with restrained energy. He moved closer to the gate, testing the latch. Locked. Beyond it, lightning split the sky, throwing both women into white silhouette, the abuser and the abused, frozen in cruel contrast. Then came the final straw. Victoria raised her hand, as if to strike Grace this time. The younger woman flinched, clutching the limp puppy to her chest. Ethan didn't wait for the blow to land. He stepped back, breathing deep, memorizing the rhythm of the rain, the way the storm covered sound. Every instinct in him was awake now, sharp and clear. He spoke softly to Luna, voice low but steady. "You remember the signal, girl? Quiet in, quick out." The dog's tail gave one firm wag. Ethan took a last look at the mansion, its bright facade gleaming through the storm, and felt the line of decision vanish beneath his feet. Whatever happened next, there would be no going back. He turned toward the house to prepare his gear, flashlight, gloves, his phone, and the body camera he used for shelter work. The storm raged harder, swallowing the sound of the world. Somewhere beyond the fence, another crash echoed, followed by Grace's desperate voice. Ethan stopped in the doorway, drenched but unshaken. "All right," he whispered. "This ends tonight." And Luna, silent and watchful, followed him into the rain. The storm hit harder than any Ethan had seen in years, a wall of wind and rain that turned Charleston's manicured streets into rivers of silver. Thunder rolled across the rooftops, echoing like artillery. The world outside the Hale estate dissolved into a blur of lightning and chaos, and yet every movement within Ethan felt sharp and almost surgical. Years of conditioning had reawakened the moment he crossed that fence. There was no hesitation, no second thought. It was instinct, silent, efficient, precise. Luna leapt first, her dark coat vanishing into the sheets of rain. Ethan vaulted over behind her, landing in a crouch on the soaked lawn. Mud splashed up his jeans, rain seeping under his collar, but he ignored the discomfort. Ahead, under the patio light, Grace knelt beside the injured puppy, sobbing, while Victoria Hale screamed curses lost in the wind. Her silk robe clung to her like a shroud, and the glint of a broken wine bottle in her hand caught a flash of lightning. "Stay away from me!" she shrieked when she saw the dark figure advancing from the rain. Ethan's voice was low, steady. "Put it down." Victoria's mascara had bled into black streaks down her cheeks. Her beauty, once polished and severe, was distorted by rage. "Who are you? Get off my property!" she barked, raising the glass. Luna growled, a deep, guttural sound that froze her mid-step. Ethan moved like a shadow, his hand snapping out to grab her wrist before the bottle could swing. He twisted, firm but not cruel, forcing her to drop it. The bottle shattered on the flagstones. Two men appeared at the edge of the patio, Victoria's private security, both in black raincoats. The first was thick-set, bald, his face marked with an old burn that gave him a permanent sneer. His name was Kurt Benson, a former bouncer known in the area for handling Victoria's business problems. The second, Miguel Torres, was leaner, younger, with slick black hair and eyes that avoided contact, someone who followed orders because fear was easier than choice. "Take him down!" Victoria screamed. Kurt lunged first, swinging a heavy flashlight like a baton. Ethan sidestepped, catching the man's wrist and driving an elbow into his ribs. The ex-bouncer grunted, doubled over. Miguel hesitated, then rushed forward. Luna intercepted him, a blur of motion, her jaws clamping around his sleeve, not tearing flesh, but halting him mid-stride. Her teeth held, her body braced against the slick ground. "Don't!" Ethan barked, and Luna froze, releasing her grip but staying between the man and Grace. Miguel backed off, hands raised. I didn't sign up for this," he stammered, stumbling into the rain and disappearing toward the driveway. Ethan turned back to Kurt, who was groaning on the ground, clutching his side. "You're done," Ethan said quietly, his voice flat with authority. "Stay down." Victoria stumbled backward, slipping on the wet tiles. Her eyes darted between Ethan and the girl. "You don't know what you're doing," she hissed. "That little parasite is mine. You think anyone will believe you over me?" Grace was shaking, her arms wrapped around the small, limp puppy, whispering something over and over, a name maybe, or a prayer. Ethan crouched beside her, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard from another human. "We're leaving," he said. "Now." She looked up at him, her eyes wide and hollow. "He's dying." Ethan lifted the puppy carefully. The tiny creature was still breathing, shallow and weak, its fur sticky with blood and rain. "Not if we move fast," he said, standing. Behind them, Victoria screamed again, but the wind devoured her voice. Ethan guided Grace toward the side gate, Luna close at their heels. He pressed his shoulder against the latch. It gave way with a splinter of wood. The three of them vanished into the storm. The drive was a blur of flashing lights, flooded streets, and the low hum of Grace's broken sobs. Ethan's truck, a dented 1998 Ford with a cracked windshield, roared through the downpour. Luna sat in the back seat beside Grace, her head resting on the girl's knee. Grace's trembling fingers sank into the shepherd's fur as if clinging to life itself. Ethan kept one hand on the wheel, the other checking the rearview mirror. No pursuit. Not yet. He could feel the tremor of adrenaline fading, replaced by the steady calculation of next steps. Every decision mattered now. Every minute. 10 miles outside Charleston, the truck turned down a narrow gravel road leading to a small clinic. Dr. Marlene Price, veterinary and emergency care. The sign was faded, but the lights were still on. Ethan knew Marlene from another life. She had served as a Navy combat medic in Iraq, short, compact, with broad shoulders and hands that never trembled. Her hair, once jet black, was now streaked with gray and tied in a tight braid. She had a dry wit, a scar on her forearm from shrapnel, and an instinct for reading people faster than any psychologist. She'd seen Ethan walk into her clinic once before, years ago, carrying a wounded dog from a training accident. She'd patched the animal and the soldier without asking unnecessary questions. When Ethan burst through the clinic door now, soaked and carrying the limp puppy, she looked up from her desk without surprise. "Damn it, Cole," she muttered. "You always bring me the kind of trouble that bleeds." He set the puppy gently on the table. Head trauma, blunt force. Marlene's tone turned brisk. "Luna, stay." The shepherd obeyed immediately, lying near the door. Marlene grabbed gauze, gloves, and a stethoscope, moving with the precision of someone who'd done this too many times to think about it. "Name?" she asked. Grace hesitated. "His name's Milo," she whispered. Marlene glanced at her for the first time, really looked. Grace stood shivering, her dress plastered to her frame, bruises visible beneath the soaked fabric. Marlene's expression softened, but her voice stayed firm. "There's a blanket on the chair, sweetheart. Wrap up before you catch pneumonia." Ethan handed Marlene his phone, showing her the recorded footage. "I need documentation, photos of the injuries, hers and the dog's. She's not safe at home." Marlene nodded grimly. "I'll do better. I'll file it under a cruelty report. Animal and human abuse. Cross-jurisdiction, they can't bury it easily." As she worked, Ethan stepped outside to the covered porch, rain still pounding the roof. He pulled out another phone, older, military issue, and scrolled through encrypted contacts until he found one name: Commander Daniel Reeves, JAG. Daniel had been his commanding officer and, in another sense, his moral compass. A tall, square-jawed man with deep lines at the corners of his eyes, Reeves had retired to Washington, but still owed Ethan a favor. Ethan typed quickly, attaching short clips and the time-stamped photos Marlene had already taken. Evidence, civilian abuse, need legal protection, and witness documentation. Minutes later, a response flashed across the screen. "Received. You did right, Cole. I'll start the paperwork. Keep them safe. Don't engage law enforcement yet." Ethan exhaled, closing the message. Inside, Marlene finished stitching Milo's wound. The puppy stirred weakly, a faint whimper breaking through the rain's rhythm. Grace gasped softly, tears mixing with relief. "He's alive?" "Barely," Marlene said, wiping her hands. "But he's a fighter." Her gaze shifted to Grace's face. "You too, by the look of it." Grace tried to smile, but it faltered. "She said no one would believe me, that the police would send me back." Ethan knelt beside her, steady and calm. "She's wrong. You're not alone anymore." For the first time, the girl's eyes met his without fear. Luna nudged her hand, tail wagging gently, and Grace managed a fragile smile. Outside, thunder rolled again, but it sounded different now, less like a threat, more like a promise. Ethan looked toward the horizon, rain still falling in silver sheets, and thought of the battle still to come. He wasn't just saving a girl anymore. He was taking on the system that allowed monsters to hide behind money. And for the first time since leaving the Navy, Ethan Cole felt like a soldier again. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the roads glistening and the air heavy with the scent of pine and wet earth. Ethan drove north through winding back roads until the city lights of Charleston were a distant dream behind them. His battered truck climbed the steep, misty trails of the Blue Ridge foothills, where the world felt untouched, an ocean of trees stretching endlessly, broken only by the whisper of wind and the cry of hawks. It was the kind of wilderness that asked for silence and rewarded secrecy. He stopped at a small, forgotten cabin hidden among tall spruce. The structure leaned slightly to one side, its roof patched with tin and moss, the porch half swallowed by vines. It had once belonged to an old Navy friend who'd moved west years ago. No neighbors for miles, no cell towers, no eyes. Perfect. Grace sat quietly in the passenger seat, her face pale, her hands folded protectively over the sleeping puppy wrapped in a blanket. Luna rested her head on Grace's lap, breathing softly, the rise and fall of her chest steady and protective. The girl's bruises had begun to fade, but not her silence. She hadn't spoken much since leaving Marlene's clinic, just a few words of thanks, half swallowed by guilt. Ethan opened the truck door. "We'll stay here until I say otherwise," he said, voice steady. "There's no Wi-Fi, no cameras, and no one coming up this road unless they're lost." Grace nodded faintly. Her eyes, still glassy from sleeplessness, moved across the forest like a trapped animal's, scanning for threats that weren't there. They entered the cabin. Dust motes drifted through beams of morning light, cutting across the wooden floor. The air smelled faintly of cedar and damp paper. Ethan moved mechanically, checking locks, closing curtains, setting up a portable battery light, and laying out supplies from the truck. Years of field work had made him methodical. Every object had a purpose, every movement a plan. When Grace finally spoke, her voice was small. "You've done this before." Ethan glanced at her, half smiling. "Too many times. Different wars, same survival rules." He built a fire in the small iron stove, the flame growing until warmth returned to the room. Luna curled near it, her fur glistening in the flickering light, while the puppy Milo nestled against her belly, whimpering softly but alive. The sight drew the first real smile from Grace, a fragile thing like sunlight through fog. Over the next few days, time took on a strange rhythm. Ethan taught Grace simple routines, how to start a fire, how to signal for help if lost, how to move quietly in the woods. It wasn't just training, it was therapy disguised as survival. Every lesson rebuilt something that years of fear had broken. He corrected her stance gently when she tried to throw a punch, encouraged her when she missed, and never once raised his voice. In the evenings, when the fire burned low, she began to talk. About her father, dead when she was 9. About her mother's obsession with perfection, her belief that control was love. About the endless parade of mentors and partners who used fear to shape obedience. Ethan listened, saying little, his gaze fixed on the flames. He understood too well that silence could heal faster than words. Meanwhile, outside their hidden world, the story was changing. Victoria Hale had discovered her daughter was gone, and worse, that her trusted guards had failed. She wasted no time rewriting the narrative. Within 24 hours, Charleston's local news stations broadcast her trembling voice, eyes glistening behind designer glasses. "My daughter Grace has been abducted by a dangerous ex-soldier. Please, if anyone sees him, a man named Ethan Cole, contact authorities immediately. There's a $50,000 reward for information leading to her safe return." The campaign spread like wildfire. Online tabloids published blurred photos of Ethan and Luna pulled from an old charity event. "Ex-Navy SEAL on the run," one headline blared. Social media echoed with speculation, half calling him a hero, half a criminal. But Ethan expected this. He'd seen people weaponize truth before. Late one evening, when the radio flickered to life with the same broadcast, Grace flinched at the sound of her mother's voice. "She's making me look like a victim again," she whispered, "and she's winning." Ethan muted the radio. Not for long. He reached for his small laptop, military grade, loaded with encrypted software. "You want to stop her?" he said quietly. "Then we make the truth louder than her lies." Grace hesitated. "She'll destroy me." Ethan leaned forward, meeting her eyes. "She already tried. The difference now is, you're not alone." It took hours of gentle persuasion, but by dawn, she agreed. The next day, Ethan set up a makeshift recording corner in the cabin, an old blanket for backdrop, one battery-powered lamp for light. Grace sat before the camera, her face still marked by fading bruises, her hands trembling in her lap. When the red light blinked, silence filled the room. Then, in a voice that wavered at first, but grew stronger with each word, she began. "My name is Grace Hale. The man the news calls a kidnapper saved my life. My mother, Victoria Hale, hurt me for years. She hurt my dog. She hurt people who worked for her. I have proof." Ethan filmed every second, his expression unreadable. Afterward, he connected the external drive with the video clips, medical photos from Marlene, and the time-stamped abuse footage from the Hale estate. He compressed the files and opened a secure email draft addressed to Alexandra Quinn, a journalist he trusted. Alexandra was known nationwide for her investigative pieces on corruption and domestic violence. She was in her mid-30s, tall and sharp-eyed. Her auburn hair cut short in a way that always looked like rebellion. Her reputation for integrity had made her both admired and feared. Ethan had worked with her once on a veterans' rights story years ago. He knew she wouldn't ignore evidence like this. He typed a single message. "Alex, it's Cole. The story is real. It involves Victoria Hale. You'll find everything you need in the attachments. Protect the girl." He hit send and waited. The reply came hours later. "Received. I believe you. This stays between us until I verify. Hold your ground, Ethan." Grace exhaled shakily when he told her, "She'll hate me forever." "She'll fear you forever," Ethan corrected softly. "There's a difference." That night, as the mountains darkened beneath a curtain of rain, Grace sat on the porch, wrapped in one of Ethan's flannel shirts. Luna rested at her feet, her head on the girl's boots. The puppy stirred beside her, one paw twitching in a dream. Ethan stepped outside, carrying 2 tin mugs of hot tea. He handed her one, sitting beside her on the worn step. "You did good," he said. Grace looked out over the misty woods. "Do you think anyone will believe me?" He took a slow sip before answering. "They'll believe what you showed them. And if they don't, we'll show them again." A faint smile ghosted across her lips. "You sound like someone who's done this before." Ethan's eyes met hers, shadowed by memory. "Once or twice. The truth has a habit of needing reinforcements." Inside, the small laptop blinked with a new notification, a message from Alexandra. "Broadcast going live tomorrow night." Ethan watched the line of light from the doorway touch the girl's face, the faint hope returning to her expression. For the first time since that night behind the fence, Grace didn't look like a victim anymore. She looked like someone learning how to be free. When dawn broke over the Blue Ridge Mountains, the mist curled through the trees like breath from a sleeping giant. The forest was silent except for the soft crackle of a dying fire and the distant cry of a hawk. Inside the small cabin, Ethan sat at the table, watching the faint blue glow of his laptop screen. The video had been live for less than 12 hours, yet it had already torn through the internet like wildfire. Millions of views, thousands of comments, news anchors replaying Grace's trembling confession on every major network. Across the wooden room, Grace slept curled on the couch, one hand resting on Luna's back. The German Shepherd was awake, her golden eyes half open, alert even in stillness. The puppy, Milo, now healed enough to stand, nestled under her paw. The 3 of them, man, girl, and dogs, had formed something fragile but real, a pack born of survival. The sharp ping of an incoming message broke the stillness. Ethan clicked it open. It was from Alexandra Quinn, her tone clipped but urgent. "FBI is moving in. Evidence authenticated. Stay put. Agents en route. Victoria's people might act first. Be ready. He closed the laptop and stood, the soldier's instinct flickering back to life. Time to move, he said softly. Grace stirred, blinking at the dim light. Is it over? Not yet, Ethan said, checking the window. It's starting. By midday, dark SUVs rolled down the dirt road leading to the cabin. But the first vehicles that appeared weren't government issue. A black Mercedes and a pair of unmarked sedans stopped near the tree line. 4 men stepped out, plain clothes, hard faces, the kind of men paid to make problems disappear. The leader, Gavin Rhodes, was tall, broad-shouldered, in his late 40s. His face carried the clean sharpness of a man who liked control, with gray stubble framing a mouth that never smiled. He wore a charcoal suit, despite the mud, his shoes spotless, his movements deliberate. Gavin had worked as a private enforcer for politicians and wealthy clients who couldn't afford legal consequences. To him, people were currency, and tonight's target had a price tag of $50,000. He gave a small nod to his men. Quick and quiet, he said. His voice was smooth, almost polite, the kind that made cruelty sound professional. Inside, Luna growled before the engines even stopped. Ethan's eyes met hers. Good girl, he whispered. He handed Grace a small duffel bag. Take Milo and stay in the back room. No matter what happens, don't come out until I call for you. Her lips parted to protest, but the look in his eyes, steady, calm, absolute, kept her silent. She gathered the puppy, clutching him to her chest, and disappeared into the back. Ethan moved to the main door, his every step precise. He wasn't armed with a gun, only a flashlight, a combat knife, and the advantage of knowing how to use a house's shadows. The first knock came soft, deceptive. Mr. Cole, Gavin called through the door, voice smooth as oil. We just want to talk. You've made quite a mess, friend. Let's make it disappear. Ethan said nothing. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Gavin continued. You give us the girl, we walk away. No one gets hurt. Ethan's reply was calm, almost conversational. You're already in the wrong forest for that. A beat of silence. Then Gavin smiled coldly and motioned to his men. The door burst inward. Luna lunged first, knocking one man off his feet. Another swung a metal rod, but Ethan deflected it with a forearm strike and drove his shoulder into the attacker's chest. The fight was fast, close, brutal. He moved with the efficiency of years spent fighting in tighter, deadlier spaces than this. A sharp elbow, a knee to the gut, a sweep. 2 men were down before the third managed to grab Luna by the collar. She twisted, snarling, and bit down on his arm, controlled but firm enough to make him scream. Gavin stayed back, watching, calculating. He drew a small pistol, its chrome barrel catching the light. Enough, he said evenly. Ethan froze, his breath steady, but his body tense. Luna growled, her teeth bared. Then came the sound that changed everything, the roar of engines and the flash of red and blue lights slicing through the trees. Gavin turned sharply toward the window. What the... FBI, a voice thundered outside. Hands where we can see them. Gavin's composure cracked for the first time. He dropped the gun just as agents flooded through the door. The leader among them, Special Agent Rebecca Lang, stepped forward. She was in her early 40s, tall and athletic, her dark brown hair pulled back into a tight ponytail. Her expression was calm but unyielding, the kind of professionalism that came from years of chasing liars in expensive suits. Her steel gray eyes scanned the room, taking in everything in seconds. Ethan Cole, she asked, her tone formal. Ethan nodded. "You're late," he said. Lang's gaze flicked to the unconscious men on the floor, then to the trembling figure of Gavin being cuffed. "Looks like you managed fine without us." Grace appeared in the doorway then, clutching Milo, her face pale but determined. Lang's expression softened slightly. "You must be Grace Hale," she said gently. "You're safe now." Grace's lower lip trembled, but she managed a nod. "Is my mother?" Lang sighed. "In custody. Your statement and the footage were enough to open a federal case. We've confirmed evidence of animal cruelty, tax fraud, and assault. She won't hurt anyone again." Grace buried her face in Luna's fur and began to cry, not from fear this time, but from release. Ethan stood nearby, watching silently as Lang gave orders to her team. For the first time in years, the weight on his shoulders felt lighter. 6 months later, spring returned to the Blue Ridge. The cabin was gone now, replaced by a sprawling wooden lodge with fenced pastures and open barns. A wooden sign stood at the entrance, carved by hand: Haven Ranch, Sanctuary for the Lost. Children laughed as dogs ran across the fields, tails wagging in the golden light. Women worked side by side, repairing kennels, their faces marked not by sorrow, but by purpose. At the center of it all, Grace Hale stood in a pale linen dress, her blonde hair loose and glinting in the sun. She looked stronger now, confident, her once-hunted eyes clear. Ethan stood beside her, older lines around his eyes, but a rare softness in his expression. Luna sat at his heel, fur gleaming, while Milo, now grown, played with a group of rescued dogs nearby. A small crowd gathered as Grace stepped up to a wooden podium. The hum of cameras surrounded her, but this time she wasn't trembling. She took a deep breath and began, her voice steady and bright. 6 months ago, I thought my life was over. I thought love was a chain and safety was a lie. But a soldier, his dog, and the kindness of strangers taught me something different. She paused, glancing down at Luna, whose tail thumped softly against the grass. Family isn't where you're born. It's where you're protected. Applause rippled through the crowd. Ethan's eyes met hers, proud and wordless. As the sun dipped low over the mountains, Luna lay beside the podium, her eyes glinting like molten gold in the fading light. Around her, laughter and music filled the air. The world that had once been broken had learned, at last, how to heal. The story of the Light of Freedom reminds us that healing doesn't begin in comfort. It begins in courage. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who've been broken the most, yet still choose kindness over bitterness. Ethan, Grace, and Luna show that family is not defined by blood, but by the people and the hearts that refuse to give up on us. In our everyday lives, there are countless Graces and Lunas, people and animals trapped in silence, waiting for someone brave enough to see them, to protect them, to believe that love can still change everything. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Share it with someone who needs hope. Comment where you're watching from. Your words might inspire another soul. Subscribe to our channel for more true, heartwarming stories of courage, compassion, and second chances. Together, we can remind the world that kindness is never wasted. It always finds its way back, just like the light after the storm.